So, yeah, I measured the chapters, and both chapter 14 and 15 are about like 10, 11 pages. Oh gosh, these wires. Everything's itching. I don't know why. Hey, at least I shaved. It's clean for the most part. My head's itching, man. Put my hat back. I don't know why after a shower my head's sensitive. Whatever. I can't ever start directly. I'm tired. As I started my second year of law school, I felt like I'd made it. Fresh off of a summer job at the U.S. Senate, I returned to New Haven with a great job at a nice law firm almost in hand. I knew that kids like me weren't supposed to get this far, and I congratulated myself for having beaten the odds. I was better than where I came from, better than Mom and her addiction, and better than the father figures who'd walked out on me. I regretted only that Mama and Papa weren't around to see it. I wish they were both around to see what he's accomplished now. But I know they're still around in spirit. You get to see me without the hat. My hair is starting to grow out now. Seriously, you see these here? It's like I'm going bald. It's not good. But there were signs that things weren't going so well, particularly in my relationship with Usha. We'd been dating for only a few months when we stumbled upon an analogy that described me perfectly. I was, she said, a turtle. Whenever something bad happens, even a hint of disagreement, you withdraw completely. It's like you have a shell that you hide in. It was true. I had no idea how to deal with relationship problems, so I chose not to deal with them at all. I could scream at her when she did something I didn't like, but that seemed mean. Or I could withdraw and get away. Those were proverbial proverbial arrows in my quiver, and I had nothing else. The thought of fighting with her reduced me to a morass of the qualities I thought I hadn't inherited from my family. Stress, sadness, fear, anxiety. It was all there, and it was intense in a different font, as you see up there. I don't want to focus. I just quit trying to focus on me. Okay. See right here? In a different font. Alright. So I tried to get away, but Usha wouldn't let me. I tried to break everything off multiple times, but she told me that was stupid unless I didn't care about her. So I'd scream and I'd yell. I'd do all the hateful things that my mother had done. And and then I'd feel guilty and desperately afraid. For so much of my life, I'd made Mom out to be a kind of villain. And now I was acting like her. Nothing compares to the fear that you're becoming the monster in your closet. There's nothing in my closet. Only thing that's been in there is me. During the second year of law school, Usha and I traveled to D.C. for follow-up interviews with a few law firms. I returned to our hotel room, dejected that I had just performed poorly with one of the firms I really wanted to work for. When Usha tried to comfort me, to tell me that I'd probably done better than I expected, but that even I hadn't, if I hadn't, there were other fish in the sea. I exploded. "Don't tell me that I did fine," I yelled. "You're just making an excuse for weakness. I didn't get here by making excuses for failure." I stormed out of the room and spent the next couple of hours on the streets of DC's business district. I thought about that time Mom took me and our toy poodle to Middletown's Comfort Inn after a screaming match with Bob. We stayed there for a couple of days until Mama convinced Mom that she had to return home and face her problems like an adult. And I thought about Mom during her childhood, running out of the back door with her mother and sister to avoid another night of terror with her alcoholic father. I was a third-generation escaper. I was near Ford's Theater. Oh, gosh. You know Ford's Theater. Let's go through it now. The historic location where John Wilkes Booth shot Abraham Lincoln. About half a block from the theater is a corner store that sells Lincoln memorabilia. In it, a large Lincoln blow-up doll with an extraordinary large grin gazes at those walking by. Get that out of my head. Okay. I felt this inflatable Lincoln was mocking me. Why the hell is he smiling? In a different font. I guess that's him thinking. Oh gosh. I look old. I'm not that old. I thought Lincoln was melancholy to begin with. And if any place invoked a smile, it surely wouldn't be a stone's throw away from the place where someone shot him in the head. I turned the corner, and after a few steps I saw Usha sitting on the steps of Ford's Theater. She had run after me, worried about being alone. I realized then that I had a problem, that I must confront whatever it was that had, for generations, caused those in my family to hurt those whom they loved. I apologized profusely to Usha. I expected her to tell me to go fuck myself. Sorry, it's just what he said in the book. I'm reading it as it's worded here, okay? It's not I can't show you. See? See? That it would take days to make up for what I'd done. That I was a terrible person. A sincere apology is a surrender, and when someone surrenders, you go in for the kill. But Usha wasn't interested in that. She calmly told me through her tears that it was never acceptable to run away, that she was worried, and that I had to learn how to talk to her. And then she gave me a hug and told me that she accepted my apology and was glad I was okay. That was the end of it. Usha had learned how to fight in the Hillbilly School of Hard Knocks. Hadn't learned how to fight in the Hillbilly School of Hard Knocks. The first time I visited her family for the first time I visited her family for Thanksgiving, I was amazed at the lack of drama. Where am I? Lucia's mother didn't complain about her father behind his back. There were no suggestions that good family friends were liars or backstabbers. No angry exchanges between a man's wife and the same man's sister. Lucia's parents seemed to genuinely like her grandmother and spoke of their siblings with love. When I asked her father about a relatively estranged family member, I expected to hear a rant about character flaws. Excuse me. What I heard instead was sympathy and a little sadness, but primarily a life lesson. I still call him regularly and check up on him. You can't just cast aside family members because they seem uninterested in you. You've got to make the effort because they're family. I tried to go to a counselor, but it was just too weird. Talking to some stranger about my feelings made me want to vomit. I did go to the library and learned that behavior I considered commonplace was the subject of pretty intense academic study. Psychologists call the everyday occurrences of my and Lindsay's life adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACE, ACEs are traumatic childhood events, and their consequences reach far into adulthood. The trauma not need be physical. The following events or feelings are some of the most common ACEs: being sworn at, insulted, or humiliated by parents, being pushed, grabbed, or having something thrown at you, feeling that your family didn't support each other, having parents who were separated or divorced, living with an alcoholic or drug user, living with someone who was depressed or attempted suicide, watching a loved one be physically abused. ACEs happen everywhere, in every community, but in every community. My nose is itching. But studies have shown that ACEs are far more common in my corner of the demographic world. A report by the Wisconsin Children's Trust Fund showed that among those with a college degree or more, a non-working class, fewer than half had experienced an ACE. Among the working class, well over half, at least one ACE, had at least one ACE, while about 40% had multiple ACEs. This is really striking. 4 in every 10 working class people had faced multiple instances of childhood trauma. For non-working class, that number was 29%. I gave a quiz to Aunt Wee, Uncle Dan, Lindsay, and Usha that psychologists use to measure the number of ACEs a person has faced. Aunt Wee scored a 7, higher than even higher even than Lindsay and me, who each scored a 6. Dan and Usha, the two people whose families seemed nice to the point of oddity, each scored a 0. Surprisingly enough. Uh, the weird people were the ones who hadn't faced any problems. I mean, any childhood trauma. Children with multiple ACEs are more likely to struggle with anxiety and depression, to suffer from heart disease and obesity, and to contract certain types of cancers. They're also more likely to underperform in school and suffer from relationship instability as adults. Even excessive shouting can damage a kid's sense of security and contribute to mental health and behavioral issues down the road. Harvard pediatricians have studied the effect that childhood trauma has on the mind. In addition to later negative health consequences, the doctors found that constant stress can actually change the chemistry of a child's brain. Stress, after all, is triggered by a physiological reaction. That's how it's said. It's the consequence of adrenaline and other hormones flooding our system, usually in response to some kind of stimulus. Gosh, my neck. This is the classic fight or flight response that we learn about in grade school. It sometimes produces incredible feats of strength and bravery from ordinary people. It's how mothers can lift heavy objects when their children are trapped underneath, and how an unarmed elderly woman can fight off a mountain lion with her bare hands to save her husband. Unfortunately, the fight or flight response is a destructive, constant companion. As Dr. Nadine Burke Harris put it, the response is great if you're in a forest and there's a bear and there's a bear. What? I can't even say this right. The problem is when that bear comes home from the bar every night. When that happens, found the Harvard researchers found the sector of the brain that deals with highly stressful situations takes over. Significant stress in early childhood, they write, results in a hyper-responsive or chronically activated physiologic stress response, along with increased potential for fear and anxiety. For kids like me, the part of the brain that deals with stress and conflict is always activated. The switch flipped indefinitely. We are constantly ready to fight or flee because there is constant exposure to the bear. Whether that bear is an alcoholic dad or an unhinged mom, we become hardwired for conflict. Um, and that wiring remains even when there's no more conflict to be had. It's just not fighting. It's not just fighting, but almost any measure. American working class families experience a level of instability unseen elsewhere in the world. Consider, for instance, mom's revolving door of father figures. No other. Where am I? No other country experiences anything like this. In France, the percentage of children exposed to three or more maternal partners is 0.5%, about 1 in 200. The second highest share is 2.6% in Sweden, or about 1 in 40. In the United States, the figure is shocking. The figure is a shocking 8.2%, about 1 in 12. And the figure is even higher in the working class. The most depressing part is that relationship instability, like home chaos, is a vicious cycle. As sociologists Paula Thornby and Andrew Cherlin found, a growing body of literature suggests that children who experience multiple transitions in family structure may fare worse developmentally than children raised in stable two-parent families, and perhaps even than children raised in stable single-parent families. For many kids, the first impulse is escape, but people who lurch toward the exit rarely choose the right door. This is how my aunt found herself married at 16 to an abusive husband. It's how mom, the salutatorian of her high school class, had both a baby and a divorce, but not a single college credit under her belt before her teenage years were over. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. Chaos begets chaos. Instability begets instability. Welcome to the family life for the American Hillbilly. I need water. For me, understanding my past and knowing that I wasn't doomed gave me the hope and fortitude to deal with the demons of my youth. And though it's cliche, the best medicine was talking about it with the people who understood. I asked Aunt Wee if she had similar relationship experiences, and she answered almost reflexively, of course. I was always ready for battle with Dan, she told me. Sometimes I'd even brace myself for a big argument, like physically put myself into a fighting position before he stopped speaking. I was shocked. Aunt Wee and Dan have the most successful marriage I've seen. Even after 20 years, they interact like they started dating last year. Her marriage got even better, she said, only after she realized that she didn't have to be on guard all the time. Lindsay told me the same. When I fought with Kevin, I'd insult him and tell him to do what I knew he wanted to do anyway. Leave. He'd always ask me, "What's wrong with you? Why do you fight with me like I'm your enemy?" The answer is that, in our home, it was often difficult to tell friend from foe. 16 years later, though, and Lindsay is still married, I thought a lot of myself about the emotional triggers I'd learned over 18 years of living at home. I realized that I mistrusted apologies, as they were often used to convince you to lower your guard. It was an "I'm sorry" that convinced me to take that fateful car ride with Mom more than a decade earlier. You know, that car ride when she, got mad at him for something he said about her or whatever. And, yeah, we don't need to talk about that. And I began to understand why I used words as weapons. That's what everyone around me did. I did it to survive. Disagreements were war. And you played to win the game. I didn't unlearn these lessons overnight. I continued to struggle with conflict, to fight with statistical odds that sometimes seem to bear down on me. Sometimes it's easier knowing that the statistics suggest that I should be in jail or fathering my fourth illegitimate child. And sometimes it's harder. Conflict and family breakdown seem like it's harder. Conflict and family breakdown seem like the destiny I can't possibly escape. In my worst moments, I convince myself that there is no exit, and no matter how much I fight old demons, they are as much an inheritance as my blue eyes and brown hair. The sad fact is that I couldn't do it without Usha. Even at my best, I'm a delayed explosion. I can be diffused, but only with skill and precision. It's not just that I learned to control myself, but that Usha has learned how to manage me. Put two of me, really, put two of me in the same home, and you have a positively radioactive situation. It's no surprise that every single person in my family who has built a successful home, Aunt Wee, Lindsay, my cousin Gail, married someone from outside our little culture. This realization shattered the narrative I told about my life. In my own head, I was better than my past. I was strong. I left town as soon as I could, served my country in the Marines, excelled at Ohio State, and made it to the country's top law school. I had no demons, no character flaws, no problems. But that just wasn't true. Two things I wanted most in the entire world, a happy partner and a happy home, required constant mental focus. My self-image was bitterness masquerading as arrogance. A few weeks into my second year of law school, I hadn't spoken to Mom in many months, longer than any point in my life. I realized that all my emotions I felt toward my mother, love, pity, forgiveness, anger, hatred, and dozens of others, I had never tried sympathy. I had never tried to understand my mom. At my most empathetic, I figured she suffered from some terrible genetic defect, uh, and I hoped I hadn't inherited it. As I increasingly saw Mom's behavior in myself, I tried to understand her. Uncle Jimmy told me that long ago he walked in on a discussion between Mama and Papa. Mom had gotten herself in some trouble and they needed to bail her out. These bailouts were common, and they always came with theoretical strings attached. She had to budget, they'd tell her, and they'd put her on an arbitrary plan that designed them they designed themselves. I think that's how you say it. Arbitrary. Arbitrary. I guess that's how you say it. I don't know. The plan was the cost of their help. As they sat and discussed things, Papa buried his head in his hands and did something Uncle Jimmy had never seen him do. He wept. I failed her, he cried. He kept on repeating, I failed her, I failed her, I failed my baby girl. Papa's rare breakdown strikes at the heart of an important question for hillbillies like me. How much of our lives, good and bad, should we credit down should we credit to our personal decisions, and how much is just the inheritance of our culture, our families, and our parents who have failed their children, and how much is Mom's life her own fault, and where does blame stop and sympathy begin? All of us have opinions. Uncle Jimmy reacts Yep. I gotta go to Google Translate now. Translate. See if I can find the word and hold it up. Hello, where's the word? I can't find the damn word. Where was I? Aha! There it is. Let's see.
Viscerally.
Viscerally. Uncle Jimmy reacts viscerally to the idea that any of the blame for Mom's choices can be laid at Papa's feet. He didn't fail her. Whatever happened to her, it's her own damned fault. Aunt Wee sees things in much the same way. And who can blame her? Just 19 months younger than Mom. She saw the worst of Mama and Papa and made her own share of mistakes before coming out of the other side. On the other side. If she can do it, then so should Mom. Lindsay has a bit more sympathy and thinks that just as our lives left us with demons, Mom's life must have done the same to her. But at some point, Lindsay says, you have to stop making excuses and take responsibility. My own view is mixed. Yeah, If you remember, she refused to go to in the movie, she refused to go to the rehab after he convinced them, after so much effort, to let her in. Whatever might be said about my mom's parents' roles in my life, their constant fighting and alcoholism must have taken its toll on her. Um, Even when they were children, the fighting seemed to affect my aunt and mother differently. While Aunt Wee would plead with her parents to calm down, or provoke her father in order to take the heat off her mother. Mom would hide, or run away, or collapse on the floor with her hands over her ears. She didn't handle it well as her brother and sister. In some ways, Mom is the Vance child who lost the game of statistics. If anything, my family is probably lucky that only one of them lost that game. What do I know that Mom is no villain? She loves Lindsay and me. She tried desperately to be a good mother. Sometimes she succeeded, sometimes she didn't. She tried to find happiness in love and work, but she listened too much to the wrong voice in her head. But Mom deserves much of the blame. No person's childhood gives him or her a perpetual moral get out of jail free card. Not Lindsay, not Aunt Wee, not me, and not Mom. Throughout my life, no one could inspire such intense emotions as my mom. Not even Mama. When I was a kid, I loved her so much that when a kindergarten classmate would make fun of her umbrella, I punched him in the face. When I watched her succumb again and again to addiction, I hated her and wished sometimes that she would take enough narcotics to rid me and Lindsay of her for good. When she lay sobbing in her bed after another failed relationship, I felt rage that could have driven me to kill. Toward the end of law school, Lindsay called me to tell me that Mom had taken a new drug, heroin, and decided to give rehab another try. Yeah, I remember that phone call. Apparently they mixed it with that one job interview when he called Usha. Like, Lindsay just decided to call, like, it's Mom. She started using again. She OD'd. Besides the point. I didn't know how many times Mom had been to rehab. How many nights she spent in the hospital barely conscious because of some drug. So I shouldn't have been surprised or all that bothered. But heroin has just a certain ring to it. It's like the Kentucky Derby of drugs. Yes, it is not good whatsoever. A lot of people have died from it, like Janis Joplin, who dated Chris Christopherson up there. See, him. She sang Me and Bobby McGee, a song he wrote. He dated her at the end of her life. Too bad she died from a heroin overdose because, the hippies back then. It was terrible. Where was I? When I learned of Mom's newest substance of choice, I felt a cloud hanging over me for weeks. Maybe I had finally lost all hope for her. No, she was there on the inauguration. She's gotten better now, but we're not at that point yet on here. But this book was published about a year after. The emotion Mom inspired then was not hatred or love or rage, but fear. Fear for her safety. Fear for Lindsay having to deal yet again with Mom's problems while I lived hundreds of miles away. Fear, most of all, that I hadn't escaped the goddamned thing. Sorry for saying the Lord's name in vain. How could I, wearing this cross, say that? I said it too many times before in this book now. Months away from graduating from Yale, I should have felt on top of the world. Instead, I found myself wondering the same thing I wondered for much of the past year, whether people like us can ever truly change. When Usha and I graduated, the crew that watched me walk across the stage numbered 18, including my cousins, Denise and Gail, the daughters, respectively, of Mama's brothers David and Pet. Usha's parents and uncle, fantastic people, though considerably less rowdy than our crew, made the trip too. It was the first time that her family met mine, and we behaved, though Denise had some choice words for the modern art at the museum we visited. Mom's bout with addiction ended, as they always did, in an uneasy truce. She didn't make the trips to see me graduate, but oh gosh, hold on. But she wasn't using drugs at the moment, and that was all right with me. Justice Sonia Sotomayor spoke at our commencement and advised that it was okay to be unsure about what we wanted to do with ourselves. I think she was talking about our careers, but for me it had a much broader meaning. I had learned much about law at Yale, but I also learned that this new world would always seem a bit foreign to me, and that being a hillbilly meant sometimes not knowing the difference between love and war. When we graduated, that's what I was most unsure about. That's chapter 14. I'm going to attempt to read through chapter 15. But first off, I need my Sinex again. Come on now. Sorry. Yeah. I used my a Sinex. Okay, great. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. What I remember most is the fucking spiders. Really big ones, like tarantulas or something. I stood at the window of one of those sleazy roadside motels, separated from a woman who certainly hadn't majored in hospitality management, by a thick pane of glass. The light of her office illuminated a few spider webs suspended between the build. This is chapter 15 now, if you don't know. The suspended between the building and the makeshift sunblocker that seemed primed to collapse on top of me. Hold on. Trying to unclog my nose so I can breathe better. Where am I? On each web was at least one giant spider, and I thought that if I looked away from them for too long, one of those ghastly creatures would jump on my face and, oh gosh, suck my blood. Lord, I'm not even afraid of spiders, but these things were big. Guys, I don't want to think about that. I am, because arachnophobia is too easy to get. Just like the fear of snakes. And once you get it, well, getting it out is not easy. Just like when you start cussing, you can't get it out, no matter how hard you try. I wasn't supposed to be here. I'd structured my entire life to avoid just these types of places. When I thought of leaving my hometown, of getting out, it was from this sort of place that I wanted to escape. It was past midnight. The street light revealed the silhouette of a man sitting halfway in his truck. The door open, his feet dangling on the side, with the unmistakable form of a hypodermic needle sticking from his arm. Shouldn't take too long for this chapter. Yes, it'll be over my bedtime over 9, but I don't care. Where was I? I should have been shocked, but this was Middletown after all. Just a few weeks earlier, the police had discovered a woman passed out at the local car wash, a bag of heroin and a spoon in the passenger seat. The needle still protruding from her arm. The woman running the hotel that night was the most pitiful sight of all. She might have been 40, but everything about her, from the long, gray, greasy hair, the mouth empty of teeth, and the frown that she wore like a millstone, screamed old age. This woman had lived a hard life. Her voice sounded like a small child's. Oh, no. Even a toddler's. It was meek, barely audible, and very sad. I gave the woman my credit card, and she was clearly unprepared. Normally people pay cash, she explained. I told her, yeah, but like I said on the phone, I'm going to pay with a credit card. I can run to an ATM if you prefer. Oh, I'm sorry, I guess I forgot. But it's okay, we got one of those machines around here somewhere. She retrieved one of those ancient card swiping machines. The kind, where am I? The kind that imprints the card's information on a yellow strip of paper. What? When I handed her the card, her eyes seemed to plead with me, and as if she were a prisoner in her own life. Enjoy your stay, she said, which struck me as an odd instruction. I had told her on the phone not an hour earlier that the room wasn't for me. It was for my homeless mother. Okay, I said. Thanks. I was a recent graduate of Yale Law School, a former editor of the prestigious Yale Law Journal, and a member of the bar in good standing. Just 2 months earlier, Usher and I were married on a beautiful day in eastern Kentucky. My entire family showed up for the occasion, and we both changed our name to Vance, giving giving me, finally, the same name as the family to which I belonged. I had a nice job, a recently purchased home, a loving relationship, and a happy life in a city I loved, Cincinnati. Usha and I had returned there for a year after law school, for 1 year clerkships, and had built a home with our 2 dogs. I was upwardly mobile. I had made it. I had achieved the American dream, or at least that's how it looked to an outsider. The upward mobility is never clean cut, and the world I left always finds a way to reel me back in. I don't know how the precise chain of events that led me to that hotel, but I knew the stuff that mattered. Mom had begun using again. She'd stolen some family heirlooms from her fifth husband to buy drugs. Prescription opiates, I think. And he'd kick her out of the house in response. They were divorcing, and she had nowhere to go. I'd sworn to myself that I'd never help Mom again, but the person who made that oath to himself had changed. I was exploring, however uneasily, the Christian faith that I'd discarded years earlier. I had learned for the first time the extent of Mom's childhood emotional wounds, and I had realized that those wounds never truly heal, even for me. So when I discovered that Mom was in dire straits, I didn't mutter insults under my breath and hang up the phone. I offered to help her. I tried to call a Middletown hotel to give them my credit card information. The cost for a week was $150, and I figured that would give us time to come up with a plan. But they wouldn't accept my card over the phone, so at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night I drove from Cincinnati to Middletown, about an hour's drive each way, to keep Mom from homelessness. The plan I developed seemed relatively simple. I give Mom enough money to help her get on her feet. She'd find her own place, save money to give her nursing license back, and go from there. In the meantime, I'd monitor her finances to ensure she stayed clean and on track financially. It reminded me. Whoa. Okay, yeah. It reminded me of the plans Mama and Papa used to put together. But I convinced myself that this time things would be different. I'd like to say that helping Mom came easily. That I had made some peace with my past and was able to fix a problem that had plagued me since elementary school. That, armed with sympathy and understanding of Mom's childhood, I was able to patiently help Mom deal with her addiction. But dealing with that sleazy motel was hard, and actively managing her finances, as I planned to do, required more patience and time than I had. By the grace of God, I no longer hide from Mom. But I can't fix everything either. There's room now for both anger at Mom for the life she chooses and sympathy for the childhood she didn't. By the way, as you heard earlier, he threw out the Christian faith. For a time, he became an atheist. I don't know when, but it don't matter. Where am I? There is room to help when I can. There is room for both anger at Mom for the life she chooses and sympathy for the childhood she didn't. There is room to help when I can, when finances and emotional reserves allow me to care in the way Mom needs. But there is also recognition of my limitations and willingness to separate myself from Mom, who, when engagement means too little money to pay my own bills and too little patience left over for the people who matter most. That's the uneasy truce I've stuck with myself, and it works for now. People sometimes ask whether I think there's anything we can do to solve the problems of my community. I know what they're looking for: a magical public policy solution or an innovative government program. But these problems of family, faith, and culture aren't like a Rubik's Cube. I don't think that solutions, as most understand the term, really exist. A good friend who worked for me in the White House and cares deeply about the plight of the working class once told me the best way to look at this might be to recognize that you probably can't fix these things. They'll always be around, but maybe you can put your thumb on the scale for a little for people at the margins. There were many thumbs to put on my scale. When I look back at my life, what jumps out is how many variables I had to fall in. I had to fall in place in order to give me a chance. There was my grandparents' constant presence, even when my mother and stepfather moved far away in an effort to shut them out. Despite the revolving door that would-be father figures, I was I was often surrounded by caring and kind men. Even with her faults, Mom instilled in me a lifelong love of education and learning. My sister always protected me, even after I'd physically outgrown her. Dan and Aunt Wee opened their home when I was too afraid to ask. Long before that, they were my first real exemplars of a happy and loving marriage. There were teachers, distant relatives, and friends. Remove any of these people from the equation, and I'm probably screwed. Other people who have overcome the odds cite the same sorts of interventions. Jane Rex runs the transfer students office at Appalachian State University. Like me, she grew up in a working class family and was its first member to attend college. She's also been married for nearly 40 years and raised 3 successful kids of her own. Ask what made a difference in her life, and she'll tell you about the stable family that empowered her and gave her a sense of control over her future. And she'll tell you about the power of seeing enough of the world to dream big. I think you have to have good role models around you. One of my very good friends, her father was the president of the bank, so I got to see different things. I knew there was another life out there, and that exposure gives you something to dream for. Sorry. My throat was hurting. My cousin Gail is one of my all-time favorite people. She's one of the first of Mom's generation. The Blanton grandchildren, Gail's life is the American dream, personified. A beautiful house, 3 great kids, a happy marriage, and a saintly demeanor. Outside of Mama Blanton, a virtual deity in the eyes of us grandkids and great grandkids, I've never heard anyone else called the nicest person in the world. For Gail, it's an entirely deserved title. Hold on, my back. I assume that Gail had inherited her storybook life from her parents. No one's that nice, I thought, especially not someone who suffered any real adversity. But Gail was a Blanton, and, at heart, a hillbilly. I should have known that no hillbilly makes it to adulthood without a few major screw-ups along the way. Gail's home life provided its own emotional baggage. She was 7 when her dad walked out, and 17 when she graduated from high school, planning for college at Miami University. But there was a catch. Mom told me I couldn't go to college unless I broke up with my boyfriend, so I moved out the day after graduation, and by August I was pregnant. Almost immediately, her life began to disintegrate. Ugh. Racial prejudice bubbled to the surface when she announced that a black baby was joining the family. Announcements led to arguments. And then one day, Gail found herself without a family. I didn't hear from any of our relatives, Gail told me. My mom said she never want to hear my name again. Given her age and the lack of family support, it's hardly surprising that her marriage soon ended. But Gail's life had grown. Where am I? Considerably more complex. She hadn't just lost her family, she had gained a young daughter who depended entirely on her. It completely changed my life. Being a mother was my identity. I might have been a hippie, but now I had rules. No drugs, no alcohol, and nothing that was going to lead to social services taking my baby away. So here's Gail, teenage single mom, no family, little support. A lot of people would wilt in those circumstances, but the hillbilly took over. Dad wasn't really around, Gail remembered, and hadn't been in years. And I obviously wasn't speaking to Mom, but I remember the one lesson I took from them, and that was we could do anything we wanted. I wanted that baby, and I wanted to make it work. So I did it. She got a job with a local telephone company, worked her way up the ladder, and even returned to college. By the time she remarried, she had hit one hell of a stride. The storybook marriage of to her second husband, Alan, is just icing on the cake. Some version of Gail's story often rears its head where I grew up. You watch as teenagers find themselves in dire straits, sometimes of their own making, and sometimes not. The statistics are stacked high against them, and many succumb to crime or an early death at worst, domestic strife and welfare dependency at best. But others make it. There's Jane Rex, there's Lindsay, who blossomed in the midst of Mama's death. Aunt Wee. Okay, yeah, that's out of the way. Who put her life on track after ditching an abusive husband. Each benefited from the same types of experiences, and in one way or another, they had a family member they could count on. And they saw from a family friend, an uncle, or a work mentor. What was available and what was possible. Not long after, I began thinking about what might help the American working class get ahead. A team of economists, uh, including Raj Chetty, published a groundbreaking study of opportunity in America. Unsurprisingly, they found a poor kid's chances of rising through the ranks. Just thought I saw something. Of America's meritocracy were lower than most of us wanted. By the merits, a lot of European countries seemed better than America at the American... Whoa. The American dream. More important, they discovered that opportunity was not spread evenly over the whole country. In places like Utah, Oklahoma, and Massachusetts, the American dream was doing just fine. A good or better than any other place in the world. It was in the South, the Rust Belt, and Appalachia, where poor kids really struggled. Their findings surprised a lot of people, but not me, and not anyone who'd spent any time in these areas. In a paper analyzing the data, Chetty and his co-authors noted two important factors that explained the uneven geographic distribution of opportunity: the prevalence of single parents and income segregation. Growing up around a lot of single moms and dads and living in a place where most of your neighbors are poor really narrows the realm of possibilities. It means that unless you have a mama and papa to make sure you stay the course, you might never make it out. It means that you don't have people to show you by example what happens when you work hard and get an education. It means, essentially, that everything that made it possible for me, Lindsay, Gail, Jane Rex, and Aunt Wee to find some measure of happiness is missing. So I wasn't surprised that Mormon Utah, with its strong church, integrated communities, and intact families, wiped the floor with Rust Belt, Ohio. These are, I think, policy lessons to draw from my life, ways we might put our thumb on that all-important scale. We can adjust how our social services systems treat families like mine. Remember that when I was 12, I watched my mom get hauled away in a police cruiser. I'd seen her get arrested before, but I knew that this time was different. We were in the system now, with social worker visits and mandated family counseling, and a court date hanging over my head like a guillotine blade. Ostensibly, the caseworkers were there to protect me, but it became very obvious, very early in the process, that they were obstacles to overcome. When they explained that I spent most of my time with my grandparents and that I'd like to continue with that arrangement, they replied that the courts would not necessarily sanction such an arrangement. In the eyes of the law, my grandmother was an untrained caretaker without a foster license. If things went poorly for my mother in the courts, I was as likely to find myself with a foster family as I was with Mama. The notion of being separated from everyone and everything I loved was terrifying. So I shut my mouth. told the social service workers everything was fine, and hoped that I wouldn't lose my family when the court hearing came. That hope panned out. Mom didn't go to jail, and I got to stay with Mama. The arrangement was informal. I could stay with Mom if I wanted, but if not, Mama's door was always open. The enforcement mechanism was equally informal. Mama would kill anyone who tried to keep me from her. Okay. This worked for us because Mama was a lunatic and our entire family feared her. Not everyone can rely on the saving graces of a crazy hillbilly. Child services are, for many kids, the last pieces of the safety net. If they fall through, precious little remains to catch them. Part of the problem is how state laws define the family. For families like mine, and for many black and Hispanic families, grandparents, cousins, aunts, and uncles play an outsized role. Child services often cut them out of the picture, as they did in my case. Some states require occupational license for foster parents, just like nurses and doctors, even when the would-be foster parent is a grandmother and another close family member. In other words, our country's social services weren't made for hillbilly families, and they often made a bad problem worse. Whoa, 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 whoa. I'm trying to look ahead now. Stop skipping so far. So 2 more pages. Or 4, technically. 4.5. 3.5. I wish I could say this was a small problem, but it's not. In a given year, 640,000 children, most of them poor, will spend at least some time in foster care. Add that to the unknown number of kids who face abuse and neglect but somehow avoid the foster care system. And you have an epidemic. One that current policies exacerbate. There are other things we can do. We can build policies based on a better understanding of what stands in the way of kids like me. The most important lesson of my life is not that society failed to provide me with opportunities. My elementary and middle schools were entirely adequate, staffed with teachers who did everything they could to reach me. Our high school ranked near the bottom of Ohio's schools. But that had little to do with the staff and much to do with the students. I had Pell Grants and government-subsidized low-interest student loans that made college affordable, and need-based scholarships for law school. I never went hungry, thanks to, at least in part, of the old age benefits that Mama generously shared with me. These programs are far from perfect, but to the degree that I nearly succumbed to my worst decisions, and I came quite close, the fault lies almost entirely with factors outside the government's control. Recently, I sat down with a group of teachers from my alma mater. I can't say that right. Middletown High. All of them expressed the worry in one form or another that society devoted too many resources too late in the game. It's like our politicians think college is the only way, one teacher told me. For many it's great,
but a lot of our kids have no realistic shot of getting a college degree. Another said, the violence and the fighting, it's all they've seen from a very young age. One of the students lost her baby like she'd lost her car keys. Had no idea where it went. 2 weeks later, her child turned up in New York City with the father, a drug dealer, and some of his family. A short of a miracle, we all knew what kind of life awaits that poor baby. Yet there's precious little to support her now, when an intervention might help. So I think that any successful policy program would recognize what my old high school's teachers see every day, that the real problem for so many of these kids is what happens, excuse me, or doesn't happen at home. For example, we recognize that Section 8 vouchers ought to be administered in a way that doesn't segregate the poor into little enclaves. As Brian Campbell, another Middletown teacher, told me, when you have a large base of Section 8 parents and kids supported by fewer middle-class taxpayers, it's an upside-down triangle. There are fewer emotional and financial resources when the only people in a neighborhood are low income. You just can't lump them together, because then you have a bigger pool of hopelessness. On the other hand, he said, put the lower income kids with those who have a different lifestyle model, and the lower income kids start to rise up. Yet when Middletown recently tried to limit the number of Section 8 vouchers offered within certain neighborhoods, the federal government balked. Better, I suppose, to keep those kids cut off from the middle class. Okay. Government policy may be powerless to resolve other problems in our community. As a child, I associated accomplishments in school with something relating to women. I don't know. My veil turkey burn. Val! There. Let me see how this is pronounced. Go back to translate. Where is it? Femininity? Is that how it is?
Femininity.
Femininity. I can't say it. As a child, manliness meant strength, courage, a willingness to fight, and later, success with girls. Boys who got good grades were sissies or... Whoa, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if I should say that word. Yeah, I regret saying this word on a few of my earlier streams. Sure. It's the other F word. Yeah, I don't want to say that. I don't know where I got this feeling. Certainly not from Mama, who demanded good grades, nor from Papa. But it was there, and studies now show that working class boys like me do much worse in school because they view schoolwork as a feminine endeavor. Can you change this with a new law or program? Probably not. some scales aren't that amenable to the proverbial thumb. I've learned that the very traits that enabled my survival during childhood inhibit my success as an adult. I see conflict and I run away or prepare for battle. This makes little sense in my current relationships, but without, hang on. Has the stream been cutting out or have I been reading fast? But without that attitude, my childhood homes would have consumed me. I learned early to spread my money out lest mom or someone else find it and borrow it. Some under the mattress, some in the underwear drawer, some at Mama's house. When, later in life, Usha and I consolidated finances, she was shocked to learn that I had multiple bank accounts and some past due balances on credit cards. Usha still sometimes reminds me that not every perceived slight from a passing motorist or a neighborhood critical of my dogs is a cause for a blood feud. And I always concede, despite my raw emotions, that she's probably right. A couple of years ago, I was driven in Cincinnati with Usha. When somebody cut me off, I honked. The guy flipped me off, and when we stopped at the red light with this guy in front of me, I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the car door. I planned to demand an apology and fight the guy if necessary, but my common sense prevailed me and I shut the door before I got out of the car. Usha was delighted that I changed my mind before she yelled at me to stop acting like a lunatic, which has happened in the past, and she told me that she was proud of me for resisting my natural instinct. The other driver's sin was to insult my honor, and it was on that honor that nearly every element of my happiness depended as a child. It kept the school bully from messing with me, connected me to my mother when some man or his children insulted her, even if I agreed with the substance of the insult, and gave me something, however small, over which I exercised complete control. Oh, Lord. For the first 18 or so years of my life, standing down would have earned me a verbal lashing as I don't want to say that. Let's just say, female genitalia, or a wimp, or a girl. The objectively correct course of action was something that the majority of my life had taught me was repulsive to an upstanding young man. For a few hours after I did the right thing, I silently criticized myself. Excuse me. But that's progress, right? Better that than sitting in a jail cell for teaching that asshole a lesson about defense driving. So that's the end of chapter 15, the final chapter. There is a conclusion, and afterward I will read another time. This is how much of the book that's left. See how thin that is? It's okay, so 249 this one is. So that's about 9 pages for that one. I'm not going to read that today. The afterword. Whoa. Okay. There's so little pages that... Okay, it goes... Acknowledgements. There's acknowledgements as well. Okay, yeah. I don't have the time to read 20 pages. It's 25 minutes past my usual bedtime, so... Okay. So thank y'all for watching. I am not done with this book yet. If y'all did enjoy and y'all would like to see more, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you have not already. And I'll see y'all soon. Adios, and God bless.